Universal Design for Learning really looks at breaking down some barriers that are in the classroom that we may not already notice. This is a quick video that's going to kind of describe to you some of the principles of UDL.
In many classrooms, the focus is on an illusory average student. Many curricula are designed for that student. Cognitive neuroscience has shown us that there really isn't an average student, and that's why it's an illusory student. Universal Design for Learning, though, is particularly focused on making sure that we get those students who have been marginalized, for whom that designing for the average student has never worked well. And that certainly means students who have been struggling, students for whom English is not their first language, students with disabilities. They've been typically marginalized by this illusory average curriculum. Secondly, though, students at the other margins, the students who are called gifted and talented, are also students who've been underserved by this mainstream curriculum. They haven't been challenged. They're bored. They're underserved as well. UDL is a framework based in cognitive neurosciences for designing learning experiences that work across a wide spectrum of learners. Its main purpose is to make sure that everybody is a successful learner and reaches what we call being an expert learner. That is, they know a lot, they know how to do a lot, and they love learning and want to do it more. The key to Universal Design for Learning is that we're designing learning experiences which from the beginning are designed to be universal and to make sure everybody learns. And that design is primarily based on the power to be very flexible in allowing choices, in allowing different paths, in allowing for things to be presented in different ways so that we reach those other two things, universal and everybody learns. The three principles of Universal Design for Learning come from careful analysis of what learning really is, and particularly the research that has been done by thousands of other researchers in cognitive science, cognitive neuroscience, neuropsychology, which have carefully looked at what comprises learning, how does learning really work, and what are its differences among individual learners. From that work, we've abstracted out three simple principles that are involved in any learning situation. How does the learner pick up information? How do they express and act on that information? And how are they engaged by the learning situation? There are three broad principles. The first has to do with how we present information to the learner. And we talk about multiple means of representation. As it turns out, there's no one way that we can present information so to be successful for everyone to learn. So we talk about multiple means of representation. So in UDL, we talk about providing multiple representations so that we're sure everyone will be able to make sense of the symbols, the language, the drawings, and so on. Take, for example, in teaching mathematics, it's typically very strong to use multiple representations, not just the symbolic expression of the numbers, but manipulables, things children can operate on and see directly, perceptually, rather than their symbolic form. So that's a great example of providing multiple representation, both the symbolic number and a physical manipulative. The second principle is provide multiple means of action and expression. And that takes into account the fact that students vary greatly in how they express what they know, how they can act skillfully, how they can communicate in language or in drawing and so on. And students differ widely, so we say we must provide multiple means of expression over the course of our teaching and learning. The third principle is multiple means of engagement, and in many ways it's the most important principle. If we don't engage students in learning, don't make it important to them, make them motivated for it, then none of the other forms of representation and expression will be that important. Within Universal Design for Learning, when we look at a curriculum, we think of four main components, and each of them need to be universally designed. The first component is, what are its goals? how do we translate standards into things that are important to do in the classroom? Secondly, what are the materials that are going to be in that classroom? Everything from a chalkboard to a textbook to a workbook to something on the wall. Are these materials key to learning? And if so, are they universally designed for learning? Third, the methods. How does the teacher go about teaching when she or he is working at helping students learn? Does she set up collaborative groups? Does she lecture? Does she provide experiences out in the world? And lastly, and very important to universal design for learning, is the means of assessment. How are we sure that learning really occurs? When we began our work, we, like most people, were focused on learners who were doing poorly, who looked like they had disabilities. Over time, we began to change our focus because we could see when we were in classrooms that the classrooms were in fact disabling, that they were not designed properly to ensure that every child would succeed. And we began more and more to see that the curriculum itself was disabled, and that the work of the Universal Design for Learning Guidelines is to reduce the disabilities in the curriculum itself so that more students succeed, more students have optimum challenges, and come out as expert learners in the end.
I love this chart because these are the three areas exactly in the brain that UDL focuses in on. Of course, the back portion of our brain, which is the recognition portion of the brain, it helps us to really categorize things, identify things. It's rote memory, any words, all of those recognition tasks. We call it the what portion of the brain. What are you learning? The frontal lobe is actually the strategic portion of the brain. It's how you're learning. It's really how we perform tasks, how we plan in our brain, how we organize our ideas before we express them to others. It's often the portion that's used when you're trying to solve math problems or when you're writing an essay on a new topic or subject. It's kind of the organizational piece of the brain. It's also what we call the frontal lobe, often in teenagers, is the portion, that decision-making portion of the brain that isn't fully developed as a teenager. So sometimes we say that that is why they make some of the decisions they make. But again, that's the how portion. The final one is the affective network, and that's the why. It really is the portion of the brain, that middle portion that lights up. Some students with the genesis of the corpus callosum, which is the middle hemisphere of their brain, is missing, have trouble with being motivated and excited, or will have negative behaviors and bursts of energy or aggression. That's because that portion of the brain really is where we get excited or interested about something. That's the portion that really helps us with knowledge retention because, again, like we talked about, the three-way kids are able to memorize things are when they're fear, motivation, and when they're engaged. So that's that why. I'm not going to take you through the site, but the UDL Toolkit is a great site to go on to learn more about Universal Design for Learning, but also to grab some great resources for each area. CAST is another site that is really good to go on. So again, if you need some more resources, CAST, I would go to CAST as well. I'm going to go through some of the top 20 sites. These are the sites that I don't want you to use when you do your when you do your website guide. You can use any of the other sites that I have in my 60-page, or any of the sites that you like, or any apps that you prefer. They don't have to be websites. So really, if someone asks you what Universal Design for Learning is, the best response is it's multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and multiple means of engagement. What does that look like? The multiple means of representation means that it is really important for you as a teacher to provide lots of ways of teaching. That means technology. That means using whiteboards sometimes. It may mean using smelly markers or stencils on paper. It may be actual representations and manipulatives on their desk. We really do have to provide different methods. And the reason being, the students who don't learn in that method, once they discover which way they learn best, they can block out the method that they don't learn well in, and they can really focus in on the method that works for them. So no one thing is going to work for all of your students. This is kind of where we get into the need for differentiation and the need for individualization. You cannot provide all day long for 30 students constant individualized instruction, but you can provide a good mix of differentiation and individualized instruction. The next piece, that action and expression, that is what I wanted you to get out of last week's different websites, that would be considered dare to differentiate, those choice boards. This is when you provide choices for the learner. They get to decide, such as the math choice that you saw when the students actually took translation and reflection, and they decided that what would work best for them is to put it in a movie with some music and do a fun dance that everyone knows, the electric slide. That's what makes this individualized. You don't have to do this portion. You have to provide the options, and the students get to choose. And the students sometimes get to provide options as well. And then that last piece, the engagement. A lot of times we forget how distracting our environments are or how unengaged our students are. We really need to make sure that we are providing multiple opportunities for students to respond and to stay engaged. If you are talking for more than 4 or 5 minutes to any age level and you have not offered an opportunity for your students to respond, it is not best instruction. I know that sounds like a crazy thing because every 5 minutes having students respond is a lot of work, but that response can be think, pair, share. That response can be show me your book. That response can be I want you to show me what I just said. All of the learners can show you on their whiteboard. They can take out what you said. It's just making sure that they're still with you. They're still engaged. Share with them what you love and what your interests are, and get motivated about what they're learning. Because the more you're motivated, that motivation and that excitement is addictive, and they will start to tap into your motivation. CAST and the UDL Toolbox, along with Book Builder, which is a portion of CAST, they're free resources. They have tons to go look at and explore that will help you in Universal Design for Learning, so definitely check those out. I'm not going to walk you through them. These next few pages of the PowerPoint were just to give you some ideas on websites that are best for the different subject areas, and also on sites that are best for Common Core right now. So these are just the top sites. Our next 2 videos are going to be about how to find apps for your students. So the next video is just all on apps, and then the final video will be on a little bit more of Universal Design for Learning. But these are some of the app finders that we're going to go through. So this is the end of video 1 of 3. There are 2 more, and they're going to help you to be able to differentiate and individualize instruction by finding what works for your students. So go ahead and close out, and I'll see you at video 2 of 3.